Hello everyone. Nice to meet you at the next edition of MATRIZ official webinars. And today, the title of the webinar is How to Write a Top-Notch Thesis or Article on Time. I'm happy to present Dr. Jerzy Chrząszcz, who is going to be a speaker today. Jerzy, the format is as follows. We have 1 hour and you have 40 minutes to present your webinar, and 20 minutes will be left for questions and answers. So, Jerzy, podium is yours. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Valerie. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Let us start. Thank you for joining my seminar. Today, I will present some ideas regarding TRIZ application in a non-technical area, as we will look at how TRIZ may be used to support writing a good diploma thesis on time. This challenge was selected as a particularly demanding representative of various reviewed applications with submission deadlines. We will start. I hope my slides will switch. Yeah. We will start by addressing the goals and motivation of this work, and then we will characterize the challenge. What is so specific? What is so challenging in writing a thesis? And analyze it in a broader context. The main part of the presentation focuses on identifying and solving specific problems using TRIZ. We will also comment on the novelty and applicability of the presented recommendations to other writing tasks to make it broader. Finally, we will also scratch a little bit the surface, but addressing some opportunities and threats brought to this area by artificial intelligence tools. As you can see, the main part, the central part of the agenda resembles a typical TRIZ project comprising problem identification, solution generation, and solution evaluation. To explain my devotion to this topic, I will kind of present myself because it matters here. I started my career as an academic teacher almost 40 years ago, which means I'm mostly teacher all the time. Then I became an independent contractor working in IT area for customers in various industries. Then I started cooperation with Pentacomp and turned from IT technology rather to IT project management, quality management, and finally security management. Then all of a sudden in 2015, I attended a seminar by Simon Litvin, where I heard about TRIZ for the first time. I got infected immediately. And so in 2016, I presented my first TRIZ conference paper. And then I met Valerie, by the way. And in 2018, I was invited by Algorithm and TRIZ to participate in the TRIZ project. Meanwhile, however, I kept teaching. And after a long lobbying at the university, I was allowed a lecture on systematic problem solving last year. Soon I realized, however, that the presented application examples generously shared by my TRIZ colleagues or mine examples taken from IT domain were not appealing enough to many participants. So I decided to approach the crème de la crème, the thesis writing with TRIZ, considering this topic to be interesting and important, first of all, to virtually all students. Therefore, the original goal of this work is to clarify essential requirements regarding thesis so the students could understand why it is so important and provide some recommendations on meeting these requirements as well. Additionally, this seems to be an understandable, nice, I would say, example of a non-technical TRIZ application. And the outcomes, fortunately, may also support writing conference papers, journal papers, and other publications. Last but definitely not least, addressing a problem that affects millions of students worldwide is expected to become yet another way of promoting TRIZ. Now let us look at why writing a thesis is so challenging. I believe that the main reason is that most students write the thesis for the first or perhaps second time in their lives, so they cannot rely much on their experience in this area. Furthermore, over the recent years or even decades, students more and more communicate through instant messengers and texting, as we all do. Consequently, they spend less time reading large structured documents, which adversely affects their abilities to develop such documents themselves. And indeed, the observed quality of the thesis and papers written by students seems to decrease in time. Here is a recent example of a final thesis draft written by a good student with over 120 remarks. Another sample is a short paper authored by an average student with over 40 remarks. And experience shows that this number may easily get double for poor students. So it's not easy to write structured documents for them. On top of this, there are several expectations regarding the thesis, directly or indirectly reflected in the formal evaluation criteria. We will perceive them as requirements and combine them in pairs to emphasize the related challenges. And so the thesis should be easy and sophisticated, short and long, theoretical and practical. To indicate the oppositions, we will solve them a few minutes later. A thesis should also be generic and specific, closed and open, written on time and, well, good enough to earn a degree. This is, after all, the goal of this an enterprise. We will analyze these requirements one by one in a moment. But before going into details, let us first see the bigger picture so we could better understand what is going on. As you know, writing a thesis is just one stage of a broader process, starting with defining a topic and ending with hopefully conferring a degree. Such a process typically starts with submitting a topic, but sometimes it is kind of opposite, and the scope emerges first, what to do, what should be done, and then we'll look for an appropriate title for it. The title and scope are usually defined by the supervisor or a third party, a real customer interested in the result of the thesis, which is quite often. And sometimes the topic is proposed by a student. Be that as it may, there must be at least one student willing to develop the thesis on a given topic and at least one supervisor willing to manage this work. When the shape of the thesis is more or less agreed upon, but it sometimes changes, of course, it is time for independent student work. And whatever the topic is, a mandatory outcome of a diploma project is a thesis, text, document, describing how it was done, what results were obtained, and how they were validated. Then the thesis is handed to reviewers who prepare written reports. Although the thesis writing, being a topic today, is indicated here as one stage, it also has its internal structure with planning, implementation, and verification, and it requires specific managing and tooling. And we will a little bit discuss this. During the defense, the thesis is orally presented to the examination committee, and the presentation, together with answers to the questions asked by the committee members, is graded. These grades and thesis grades assigned by the reviewers are used to decide about conferring a respective degree. After performing such a walkthrough, we can identify key entities involved in the process, including the participants, objects, and parameters, like those shown in the slide. Knowing the context better, we may now turn to specific problems. one more thing, in a typical TRIZ project, we have a customer defining requirements and constraints, who is reflected mostly by the university providing thesis evaluation criteria. Whereas when it happens that there is a real customer, a third party interested in actual outcome, technical outcome usually, this is also reflected in the requirements. We will also, in addition to this, what we have from the third party, the customer and the university, we will formulate additional assumptions to direct the solution search. And the first point is that reviewers are perceived here as the most impactful and therefore the most important thesis readers. Secondly, the reviewers do not have to be experts in all the areas covered by the thesis, as nowadays theses are usually multidisciplinary. So it's quite natural that one person cannot span all this subject. In particular, this should be usable for other students interested in building their solutions upon the results achieved. Generally, experts and non-expert readers should be able to benefit from reading this thesis. In the main section, we will drill down particular requirements to better understand their purposes and interrelations. And so by easy and sophisticated, we mean that non-trivial content, which is worth conferring a degree, should be presented, delivered in a way that is at least comfortable to the reader, and especially, as we said, the reviewer, who is to grade the thesis. We might say that the thesis should be advanced enough and also understandable enough. About the sophistication, the adequate intellectual value should be verified by the supervisor, who to some extent brands this thesis as being done after his or her supervision. Nevertheless, there are several ways to increase the readability of a thesis, and this is in the hands of student, of the author. Three powerful rules are to provide clear structure, consistent language, and this covers both terminology and the language of narrating the thesis, telling the story. And the third one is comfortable transitions from different perspectives, from broad perspective to specific issues. And respective inventive principles supporting, or if you will, justifying these recommendations are segmentation, homogeneity, and partial or excessive action. We could say that these are general good writing rules, indeed, but we may also bring some specific techniques like using various notations or modalities to increase the chances that readers of, unknown preferences will find the content comprehensible. Describing dimensions in millimeters and inches is a simple example, but there is more like this. For instance, some people prefer referring to the wavelength when we talk about radiation, while others are used to wave number or frequency, especially the people from spectroscopy like wave numbers. Likewise, we may describe algorithms using different forms like free text, structured text, flowchart, pseudocode, or even actual code in a specific programming language, depending on the intended effect. The writing guides and this presentation itself implement the principle of prior action. We give something in advance to increase chances that the result will get better. It may also be used, the principle may also be used in the thesis text to prepare the reader for the next section, following sections, by introducing some important terms in advance to make a good setup, to make a golden bridge to go through. Sometimes transposing tables may dramatically enhance their legibility, which directly implements the principle of inversion, or the other way around, if you will. The navigation through a thesis may benefit from using hyperlinks, transiting to specific sections, figures, or tables. And this functionality implements the principle of another dimension. It is also offered by popular writing tools such as Microsoft Word. The principle of nesting may be used in various ways, for instance, to provide an overview in a section preamble and then proceed with a detailed description in the following subsections. The next challenge is that a thesis should be short enough and long enough. How much is enough? Conferences and journals usually indicate acceptable ranges explicitly. And while the page count is easy to indicate and check, it does not actually reflect the crucial requirements, the essence of the requirements regarding the content, which should be complete yet brief. Or using a brilliant, really, Einstein's recommendation, it should be as simple as possible, but not simpler. The former implies that we should remove everything which is not necessary, and the latter warns not to harm the whole thing with oversimplification. We could say that compact and complete, it sounds like a motto of lossless data compression, and this is something true in it. The proposed recommendations are to adapt the section sizes to their roles, their importance. So we may rush through the not essential ones, especially if we have to indicate some content because it's mandatory. It's required by the template of the thesis. And we are not convinced that this part is essential. We may make it short. We may also use mixtures. This is known way to enrich the content, to make it more condensed, more interesting. We may, for instance, add values to the graphs to avoid providing them in separate tables. So this way we save space, but the information is provided. Or to combine plots of different parameters using graphs with 2 vertical axes, or switch to 3-dimensional plots, and so on. For the next topic, we need a short disambiguation, as theoretical and practical may refer to, well, basic research versus applied research. However, we are more interested here in describing thesis characteristics, generic characteristics, rather than its domain. So in this aspect, theoretical refers to a sound conceptual justification, and practical refers to credible validation of the outcomes. Simply put, the developed solution, the deliverables, should be presented as properly designed and validated. These requirements pertain to the thesis topic rather than writing, and I don't have any inventive principles in this section. Instead, I would like to emphasize the role of literature review, which is often perceived by students as a, well, useless drill. Usually, TRIZ consultants are not experts in the subject matter of a new project. So the first thing to do is to learn what others have already done in the respective area. We need to know which research directions are the most prospective, the most promising, and which shortcomings are already known. Besides realizing the state of the subject domain, we also need a literature review to identify adequate metrics to use. What is the habit of measuring things in this particular area, and to credible answers, credible results to compare with, some benchmarks, how good or not good our proposed solution is. Without this reference frame, we cannot really claim that our solution is, well, better than something else. Literature may also help recognize resources that can be used to develop better solutions. And I think this TRIZ-wise justification seems directly applicable to a situation of a student developing his or her diploma project. Generic and specific may be understood as wide applicability combined with the proven usability of the developed solution in a specific application. In other words, the solution, I believe, should be presented as promising by demonstrating it was properly verified it's firm, and it may be used in other areas. Again, this is more about the thesis subject, the intellectual content, the main thing in the thesis, rather than writing. Fortunately, TRIZ offers at least 3 tools that may be useful here. Function-oriented search may help in finding a needed solution in another application area, as we know. The inverted function-oriented search was specifically created to identify new potential markets for a developed solution. And I think this is interesting to discuss this in the summary, and there is usually a part further work. Possible applications may be indicated by using this tool. And finally, the feature transfer method. It's a strictly algorithmic approach for transplanting some superior features from the existing solution, serving similar purposes in other systems. So it can also be easily used to enrich the thesis, the matter of thesis. Now, closed and open means that a thesis should be finished to some extent by delivering a working or at least convincing solution or proof, and it should also demonstrate its development potential. There is a common misunderstanding about that a thesis must have a positive outcome, while actually falsifying a hypothesis, for instance, could also be an acceptable and interesting outcome if the inference or the experiments, if it is experimental, are conducted properly. After all, if the results were known in advance, we would not need to perform any research. So the thing to be graded is about the research, the techniques used, the intellectual abilities of the student, not if the answer is yes, no, or whatever else. In addition, a better understanding of a concept, system, or technology, whatever is the subject of the thesis, may result in its new applications. And in TRIZ, we have super effect analysis to support the systematic exploration of development potential by expanding the newly developed solution on the solution under development using available resources. This tool allows for enhancing the initial solution idea in its very early conceptual stage. And finally, a thesis should be delivered on time and demonstrate adequate quality. Contrary to all previous sections dealing with constraints described as if they were physical contradictions, these requirements clearly refer to different characteristics and the interrelation. The essence of this section could be rephrased using the Latin proverb festina lente, which warns against doing important things in a hurry. And programmers, by the way, learn very early that either you write fast code or you write code fast. In TRIZ, as you probably know, we use the if-then-but formula to describe a situation when improving one essential parameter of the system deteriorates another essential parameter. So one scenario is that fast writing takes less time, but the quality suffers. Will the slow writing alone increase the thesis quality? I don't think so. So let us reformulate the second technical contradiction by referring to author's diligence. The first conclusion is that fast and diligent students may be able to deliver good theses on time without any help. Good for them. The second conclusion is that other students may need help and would benefit with support with quality assurance or productivity or perhaps management, depending on the strengths and weaknesses. Thesis quality may be increased by self-reviewing or using automated document checkers, or by asking another person to read the text and provide feedback. The self-reviewing seems the easiest to perform, but it is often ineffective for at least two reasons. Firstly, after some time of working with own document, the author frequently sees what was intended, what he or she had in mind, rather than what is actually written. And secondly, the author and the supervisor as well may be too familiar with the topic, too close to the picture to notice some logical gaps. And therefore, it is strongly recommended to ask a non-expert to read the thesis and indicates its deficiencies. When it comes to increasing writing speed, the eternal temptation of using the works of others without credits has been enormously intensified by the availability of generative language models like GPT. Such behavior must be identified as plagiarism, which disqualifies the thesis and puts the student in a bad position if it comes to that. Therefore, instead of plagiarism, the use a copy principle may be employed in a different way. For instance, to increase productivity by translating the text, and AI is good at it, which was written in the student's native language. So the work is easier and the outcomes are good enough. The remaining guidelines are about handling insufficient writing speed rather than increasing the speed. So this should be the title of the slide. Indeed, the primary goal here is to deliver the thesis on time, which also may be achieved by a slow writer starting early enough. Another strategy is to define priorities and start writing with the must-have and should-have sections, leaving the ornaments, the nice-to-have fragments as the very last ones. Such an approach allows us to minimize the harm of not finishing exactly on time. And finally, like in any project, it makes perfect sense to monitor the work progress periodically. Sometimes, however, all these countermeasures may happen to be ineffective and the defense must be rescheduled. I believe this at very first look, unfortunate situation may be converted into a benefit by improving the thesis using the additional time given. Experience shows that the project is usually nearly completed at this point, so the students' efforts may be safely redirected to thesis enhancement, especially by trimming unnecessary fragments. I mean the fragments that add little value and may, on the other hand, distract the reviewers, which are, as you know, the most important readers. And now it's time to comment a bit on the novelty and applicability of the results, and we will start with the applicability. While the bachelor's, master's, and PhD theses differ in both challenge ranks and specific evaluation criteria, they are also alike in several ways. The common generic purpose is to earn a degree by demonstrating specific author's skills and achievements. And they document diploma projects in formats similar enough to consider the presented recommendations to apply. Additionally, most of the guidelines seem applicable to conference papers, journal papers, and other reviewed publications with delivery deadlines to meet, which makes the process time-bound. As to the novelty, even if many of the presented recommendations you could find widely known, by naming particular inventive principles standing behind them, we first demonstrate how these recommendations, these outcomes, fit with TRIZ. And second, we also reveal the intrinsic nature, like dividing, copying, inverting, and so on. On top of this, a few uncommon recommendations were formulated, like indicating deficiencies of the supervisor as a reviewer, or diversifying notations to increase comprehensibility. And finally, some innovative ideas resulted from approaching the thesis writing with TRIZ kind of anew. And we will briefly present two of them. We are all used to tooltips appearing in applications, or to screen tips like this one while browsing web pages. Such functionality, I believe, would be very useful in the thesis to provide in-place acronym explanation or reference identification without actually jumping to the vocabulary or literature section, as it is done with hyperlinks. It looks, however, like this cannot be done easily in a straightforward way with standard tools such as Microsoft Word and PDF export, because the hyperlinks are currently the only features, the only creatures effectively exported from a Word document to PDF format. This sample screen tip was generated, is displayed as a description of a transparent button added manually to the PDF file exported from Word, which I think we can agree it's a kind of clumsy workaround to implement a missing feature that should be available out of the box. The second example I prepared uses machine learning, so it was moved to the next section regarding AI tools. As you know, people perceive the world through senses. There is no other way. And a few months ago, Oliver Meyer delivered a webinar in our cycle of web webinars on the human senses in TRIZ. Usually, the most essential signals from the world to a person come through one of three input channels. It may be visual, it may be auditory, or it may be kinesthetic. And this is different for different people. What is important here, these sensory preferences are also reflected in the spoken and written language, which obviously affects comprehensibility of the message at the other side, I mean the recipient, with other preferences especially. And indeed, it may be that a visual person cannot see the merit, and kinesthetic person doesn't feel comfortable with the idea, which on the other hand, speaks for itself for an auditory person. And the application developed within this master's project is a Microsoft Word plugin that analyzes and adjusts the sensory connotations, so-called the phrases with sensory meaning, somehow connected with senses in a document. Long story short, the plugin recognizes words and phrases relating to particular senses, calculates statistics, and also proposes some replacements selected using machine learning to achieve the required sensory profile. The first kind of obvious choice is to equalize. This approach allows for equalizing the connotations to increase chances for proper perception by a wide audience of diversified preferences. So let us give chances to all. But the other possible application, perhaps more specific, is to tune the sensory profile to a specific recipient of the message if we know this profile. And this can be investigated by analyzing text generated by that person. Now, this was the bright side of AI in neighborhood of developing and writing a thesis. Now about the bad news. A thesis is claimed to be an independent student's work, and any reproduced information should be clearly referenced to respective sources. So it should be clear what is authored by the student and what is not. Regretfully, some students violate this requirement, such regulations. And here is a kind of terrifying example with 15 infringements spotted in 20 pages. The things got much worse with introduction of AI tools, as nowadays, with advanced AI language models like GPT, specific content may be generated and tuned, customized on demand. So the chances to detect this with anti-plagiarism checkers used before, which looked for a copy-pasted fragments, are at best questionable. And here comes a snapshot announcing a recent workshop on AI in higher education. This link is clickable, so if you're interested, you can access the presentations easily. Professor Ganza, one of the participants, suggested in her speech that we face a situation somehow, with all the proportions kept, to the expansion of handheld calculators in the past. But in the case of AI invasion, we cannot choose the ignore option. While AI boosted search engines and grammar checkers seem allowable and recommendable as state-of-the-art tools supporting thesis development, we definitely don't want the students to submit theses written by AI as their own. So we will have to adjust our regulations and reviewing procedures and also formal documents to this new situation. This is a new normal with, AI sitting at the backseat. To summarize, we presented thesis writing in a broader context and described essential constraints of this task as conflicting requirements. Then we analyzed them to identify what's behind, what are the benefits hidden behind the required characteristic, what is the justification for this. And finally, we demonstrated how TRIZ tools might support writing a thesis and briefly discussed the applicability of the presented recommendations to other writing tasks. As to using AI in writing, the bottom line is that we can see the very first regulations emerging in some Finnish, to my knowledge, Austrian and some German universities just these days, which suggest two important changes, namely requesting the authors to explicitly indicate the AI-generated content and using a new generation of anti-plagiarism tools, which are capable of detecting such contents reliably. This will be all from my side. Now it's time for questions. Thank you.
Okay, Jerzy, thank you very much for the very excellent decomposition of an art of writing thesis according to inventive principles and philosophy of TRIZ. Definitely, we see today that AI is taking on intensely, especially on writing. And well, it's hard to say. You see that even today, the gurus of industry meet around the table to discuss the prohibitive measures against using AI. Well, okay, but I don't want to give all the questions because I'm sure we could discuss it in a long run. But I would like to address the audience. Please, anybody, your questions to Jerzy, please either write them in the chat or pronounce them with a voice. Please, your questions. We have 20 minutes for Jerzy answering questions. Well, as long as people think about their questions, I will ask a question. Jerzy, what do you think? Will the knowledge of grammar disappear? Because AI can do perfectly correct grammar.
Well, I can give you a first-hand example. As English is not my native language, I used to use Grammarly to check my English, my documents written in English, right?
Yeah.
And in time, I can see that grammar indicates less errors. So despite the advanced age, I'm still learning some things, and I'm able to write better. So I think even if we have this AI boosted, like Grammarly is, spell checkers, grammar checkers, style checkers, style improvers, advisors, it still can be taken as an increment to skills. We can learn from this. I can learn from this. I believe others also can.
Right. But one thing is when you incorporate into your knowledge what you learn, and the other thing is you ignore it, just let it do the job.
Yes, of course. It's always a matter of that decision. Take it or leave it. Just make it done.
And I'm very curious, since you are closely related to academy, do students use ChatGPT in their thesis now?
I believe they do. And because in our university, it's not regulated in any way. That I was very curious about asking about this in Graz during our conference in Graz, and also during the TRIZ Future conference held during the latest days. And I got responses from Austrian teacher that they just being introduced this in the university, and also Claudia Henschel from Berlin University confirmed that this kind of shift is pretty much same as German universities do these days. So I think it will be some, and they actually got it from some hints from Finnish universities, which was probably the one of the first ones to get this. In our university, by the way, to my best knowledge, it's not regulated yet. And to make the answer, I believe we should require either declare I have not used AI in any way, which may be hard because the browsers use AI, the checkers use AI, and so on. The other approach is indicate what you did with AI, and we will think how to grade it. I hope this answers your questions.
Yes, thank you very much. There is a question from Mara Klepp. How would you use TRIZ to figure out a topic to write about, or even finding a research question?
That's interesting, and I believe the TRIZ projects about new project development or forecasting future along trend lines are very, very close to this approach. If we have some idea about state of the art in a given domain, we can somehow speculate what is known, what would be the next, what is the holy grail in this domain, and this would be our IFR, I believe. What could have happened if we found this, if we could be able to achieve this? And I actually generated once a topic from one of my cousins who asked me, I'm approaching the degree. Do you mind if could you please suggest? And we did some conversation approaching what could be valid, what could be valuable, what could be wow in this area, and it worked.
Well, if I may add, at one of my courses, university courses on TRIZ, I gave an assignment. Please think about the current contradictions. Well, in technological summit, it's a technology course, so within technologies, like microelectronics or food industry and so on. And when thinking about contradictions, you instantly come with insights, which are require further research. Okay, another question from Nati Galiev. AI grammar for the forecasting humanitarian knowledges, regardless value question, is it expected?
We have just participated in a 3-day conference where such topics were discussed by prominent AI experts, and there is no unequivocal answers usually. What the experts agree about is that nowadays stage of AI tools allow them to generate knowledge, but not wisdom. They are very fast, very effective, very cheap actually in bringing answers if you ask right questions. They do not ask questions. This is the difference. I cannot answer the question about forecasting humanitarian knowledges.
Okay, next question from Victor Fay. How can TRIZ dynamization principle be employed to encourage adaptability and flexibility in a student research approach, especially when unforeseen challenges arise during the thesis process?
Well, first of all, thank you, Victor, for this question. Glad to see you here. This is also the case that during the thesis, like in any project, unexpected things happen. So we almost always have to adjust either the scope or the approach or our imagination of the achievable outcomes. And like in other projects, even without TRIZ, even if simple project management tools, if you have things somehow structured, and in TRIZ, this should be modularization, and this is, I believe, what Victor meant by flexibility. Make the thing more, make the pieces more independent, make them more movable within the whole shape. And I usually recommend, and we usually do this with my students, kind of a composition that can be rearranged easily. And this really helps. If it's fixed, if it's monolith, it's make or break, which makes no sense, actually. It should be in modules, and then we can apply this approach with priorities, must have, can have, would have, nice to have. And then we even properly structure the process. And like in project management, we can set a line which can be movable. If we are happy, if we are lucky, sorry, we can have all. If not, we will deliver the minimum, which is still good enough to have a degree given. I hope this answers your question, Victor.
Okay, thank you, Jerzy. The next question comes from Noah. Thank you for sharing your initiatives using TRIZ principles to write theses. Share your experience where TRIZ techniques and principles used as research methodology.
Frankly speaking, I'm not a great researcher. I'm most involved in teaching, especially during the latest 20 years. My research period actually kind of was frozen after PhD. I'm not developed my research visibility from that time. So I'm also not, perhaps not the right person to answer this in an authoritative way. That's it. Let's make it like that.
Okay, Jerzy, thank you very much. Colleagues, please think about more questions. We have a couple of more minutes. Okay. There seem to be no questions. So, Jerzy, thank you very much for a very insightful and interesting presentation. And I wish you luck with research, okay, with teaching and TRIZ, and application of principles of TRIZ, even more.
Thank you very much. Thank you all for coming here.
Okay, thank you very much. And please see the announcement of our next webinar. Thank you very much, Jerzy.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.